welcome everyone. We are delighted to have you join us for Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday webinar for the month of August. As the summer sun shines brightly across the globe, let's ensure our digital world is equally refreshed and protected. So, folks, get ready to heat up our defenses with the latest security patches and the updates released in this month's Patch Tuesday. With immense gratitude, we express our delight at having you all join us on this fine evening. Let's get ready for an insightful session. So, what's on the agenda for today's session? First up, we'll be discussing the latest ransomware and cybersecurity attacks that made the headlines in recent times. Then, we will have a detailed breakdown of the Windows lifecycle as well as the end of life dates for the various Windows versions. Next, we'll be discussing the Patch Tuesday updates for the month of August. And then we'll also be demonstrating how you can simplify the patch management process for your network's endpoints using Manage Engine's patch management solution, that is Patch Manager Plus. Followed by that, we will also be sharing some of the best practices for patching that you can follow to perform patch management for your hybrid networks. And last but not the least, as always, we'll have a question and answer session wherein we'll be addressing all your queries. All right, so let's start with the ransomware and cybersecurity news. In recent developments, Llama C2 has gained attention as a highly dangerous malware operating as a malware as a service platform. This means that even individuals with little to no technical knowledge can rent or purchase Llama C2 using it to launch sophisticated attacks with ease. Llama-C2 is a command and control framework that allows attackers to remotely control compromised systems, execute malicious commands, steal sensitive data, and spread malware across networks. Its design makes it exceptionally difficult to detect, even evading traditional security solutions. In fact, Llama-C2 has proven so elusive that even Microsoft Defender has had difficulty stopping it from breaching systems. This underscores the urgent need for more advanced protection measures. Manage Engine Endpoint Central's next-gen antivirus tools with behavior and deep antivirus detection engines are the only way to go for stopping these malware. Our threat detection team is happy to announce that Manage Engine's next-gen antivirus software is able to detect Llama C2 stealers. If you want to learn more about it, you can just refer to the link that has been shared in the chat now. All right, so let us take a look at the Windows lifecycle. As of now, the Windows 11 version 21H2, which was released on 4th October 2021, will reach the active support end and the security support end on the 8th of October 2024. So dear participants, if you're using this version of Windows, then it's high time to update to the latest version, that is Windows 11 version 22H2 and Windows 11 version 23H2. At Manage Engine, we are pleased to announce that you can now effortlessly initiate the feature pack update through Patch Manager Plus. For detailed instructions on upgrading to Windows 11 version 22H2 and 23H2, you can just refer to the forum link that has been shared in the chat. So without further delay, it is highly recommended that you upgrade your Windows versions to newer ones. Now, let's take a look at the Patch Tuesday update breakdown. So this time there are 89 vulnerabilities, out of which 10 are also zero-day vulnerabilities. We'll be discussing them in the later slides, but taking a look at the breakdown here, we see a total of 180 patches released to mitigate the 89 vulnerabilities. Also, if these vulnerabilities are left unpatched in your endpoints, they can cause 7 different kind of impacts in your systems, which we'll also be discussing in detail in the following slides. As I said earlier, there are 10 zero-day vulnerabilities released in this month's Patch Tuesday. For the starters, we'll be diving into two of the most important zero-day vulnerabilities. First up, we have the zero-day vulnerability CVE 2024-38193 in Windows Ancillary Function Driver for WinSock, and it is being actively exploited and is rated as important too. This one is particularly concerning because it allows attackers to gain system privileges, which, as we all know, is one of the highest levels of access in a Windows environment. Imagine what an attacker could do with full control over a system, right? Installing programs, altering or deleting data, and even creating new user accounts with full rights. It's like handing over the keys to the entire kingdom. What's really interesting, or rather alarming, I would say, about this vulnerability is that it's part of a long history of similar flaws in the Winsock driver, a component that interfaces directly with the network stack. This has made it a prime target for attackers for over a decade. They are drawn to it because it offers a valuable entry point for privilege escalation attacks. And who wouldn't be interested in system privileges, right? The potential for widespread damage here is massive, which is why this vulnerability makes for such an engaging discussion point. It's a stark reminder, guys, of how crucial it is to secure every layer of our systems. This zero-day vulnerability is assigned a rating of 7.8. Next up, we have CVE 2024-38189 that is found in Microsoft Project and it is being actively exploited. This one's a bit sneaky because it relies on the victim opening a malicious Microsoft Office project file under certain conditions. Specifically, when the block macros from running in Office files from the Internet policy is disabled. If the attack is successful, it can lead to remote code execution, giving the attacker the ability to take full control of the affected system. That's a pretty scary thought, isn't it? What makes this vulnerability particularly interesting is that it focuses on Microsoft Project, a tool that's critical for managing large-scale projects in many organizations. Just imagine the potential impact. Exploiting a single vulnerability in such a commonly used software could compromise an entire network, especially if macros aren't being properly managed. This vulnerability is also engaging because it highlights how social engineering plays a role in cybersecurity. Users might unknowingly trigger the attack by simply interacting with what seems to be a legitimate document. The everyday relevance of this kind of threat, combined with the potential for significant damage, really makes this a critical issue to discuss. This vulnerability has a CVSS rating of 8.8. The other important zero-day vulnerability are CVE 2024-38178 in scripting engine memory corruption, and it is being actively exploited. The zero-day vulnerability in it can cause remote code execution. To exploit this vulnerability, an attacker must craft a special URL and get an authenticated user to click on it. Once clicked, the attacker can trigger remote code execution. This has been assigned a CVSS rating of 7.5. Then we have CVE 2024-38106 in Windows kernel and it has been rated as important. The zero-day vulnerability in them can cause elevation of privilege. To exploit this vulnerability, an attacker needs to win a race condition. If successful, the attacker could achieve elevation of privilege on the target system. This has been assigned a CVSS rating of 7.0. Moving on to the next zero-day vulnerability, CVE 2024-38213, which is found in Windows Mark of the Web, and it is being actively exploited. This vulnerability has been rated as important and can cause security feature bypass. Successful exploitation of this vulnerability allows the attacker to bypass the smart screen feature. However, exploitation requires users to open a malicious file that the attacker has crafted and distributed. This has been assigned a CVSS rating of 6.5. The next zero-day vulnerability is CVE 2024-38107, that is found in Windows Power Dependency Coordinator, and it is being actively exploited. This vulnerability in it can cause elevation of privilege. A successful exploitation of this vulnerability enables access to system privileges to the threat actor. This has been assigned a CVSS rating of 7.8. Next up, we have the zero-day vulnerabilities that have been publicly disclosed. According to Microsoft, these vulnerabilities are either less likely to be exploited or have not been exploited to date. To know more about these, kindly refer to the Manage Engines forum post link that has already been shared in the chat. Now let's move on to the critical vulnerabilities. We have 7 critical vulnerabilities this month out of the total 89 vulnerabilities. We have 76 important vulnerabilities and 1 moderate vulnerability. Let's talk in detail about the critical vulnerabilities. The critical vulnerability CVE 2024-38159 and CVE 2024-38160 is a remote code execution vulnerability affecting the Windows network virtualization. As we all know, Windows Network Virtualization feature allows for the creation and management of virtual networks in a Windows Server environment. An attacker might exploit this vulnerability by exploiting the unchecked return value in the wnv.sys component of Windows Server 2016. Successful exploitation could lead to a critical guest-to-host escape. The next critical vulnerability, CVE 2023-40547, is a remote code execution vulnerability affecting the Linux shim boot. As we know, Linux shim boot refers to a crucial component in the secure boot process for Linux-based systems. Successful exploitation of the vulnerability could lead to remote code execution, crash, denial of service, and exposure of sensitive data under specific circumstances. Moving on to the next critical vulnerability, CVE 2024-38063 is yet again a remote code execution vulnerability affecting the Windows Transmission Control Protocol or Internet Protocol. As we know, the Windows TCP/IP is an industry standard protocol suite designed for large networks of network segments connected by routers. An unauthenticated attacker may send IPv6 packets, including specially crafted packets, to a Windows machine, which can lead to remote code execution. Moving to the next critical vulnerability, CVE 2024-38140. It is again a remote code execution vulnerability affecting the Windows Reliable Multicast Transport Driver. Windows Reliable Multicast Transport Driver is a computer networking protocol that sends messages from one sender to multiple receivers in a distributed system. An unauthenticated attacker may exploit the vulnerability by sending specially crafted packets to a Windows Pragmatic General Multicast open socket on the server. Exploitation of the vulnerability does not require any user interaction. The next severe vulnerability, CVE 2024-38109, is an elevation of privilege vulnerability affecting the Azure Health Bot. An authenticated attacker may exploit a server-side request forgery vulnerability in Microsoft Azure Health Bot. On successful exploitation, an attacker may elevate privileges over a network. And lastly, we have CVE 2022-3775, which is a remote code execution vulnerability affecting Windows Server 2012 R2. Microsoft has not released any information about the vulnerability as yet. Now let's take a look at the operating systems and the applications that have been affected this month. So as we saw earlier, there were a total of 89 vulnerabilities, out of which 65 has been found in Windows, 8 in Microsoft Office, 6 in Microsoft Azure, 4 in Developer Tools, 2 in Mariner, 1 in Microsoft Dynamics, and 1 in Microsoft Applications. Now, speaking about the patches by impact, as we mentioned earlier, that if these vulnerabilities are left unpatched, they can have 7 different kind of impacts on your system. Starting with 34 causing elevation of privilege, 28 causing remote code execution, 7 causing information disclosure, 6 causing denial of service, and 5 causing spoofing. Apart from that, these vulnerabilities can cause security feature bypass as well as tampering in your systems. Followed by that, we will be having a detailed breakdown on operating systems and applications affected. We will dig a little deeper on these now. First up, we have Microsoft Office, and the severity of the vulnerability is important, with impacts being on remote code execution, spoofing, and elevation of privilege. These are the CVE IDs for Microsoft Office, starting from CVE 2024-38084 till CVE 2024-38197. Then we have Microsoft Windows, and the severity of the vulnerabilities are critical, important, and moderate, with impacts being on all the 7 impacts of this month. These are the CVE IDs for Microsoft Windows. We have another slide of IDs as well. So, dear participants, I shall pause for a few moments for you to take screenshots or take notes. Besides the vulnerabilities fixed in this month's Patch Tuesday, Microsoft has also republished few CVE IDs. To learn more about these, I request you all to refer to the forum link shared in the chat. For this month's non-security updates, we have Microsoft Visual Studio Enterprise. Again, dear participants, for more information, kindly refer to the forum post link shared in the chat box. Next, we are glad to tell you that out of all the patches that have been released in August 2024, so far we support a total of 597 patches. So you can deploy 597 of these patches using Manage Engines, Endpoint Central, Patch Manager Plus, and Vulnerability Manager Plus. I see a few of the attendees joining now. So folks, in case you have missed the first part of the webinar, there's absolutely nothing to worry about because we are recording this session, and in 1 to 2 working days, we'll be sharing the recording of the session as well as the slide deck of this presentation with your registered email IDs. Meanwhile, dear guests, if you have any queries, please feel free to ask via chat. Our expert patch pundits will be answering them. Next up, I'll be demonstrating you how you can simplify patch management in your network with Manage Engine's flagship patch management solution, Patch Manager Plus. But before that, we can take a look at some of the best practices for patching a distributed network. So by distributed network, I mean users in LAN as well as users in branch offices and roaming users. All right, let's begin with the best practice. First of all, as a thumb rule, it's always recommended that you test the patches before deploying them to the production environment. So why is this necessary? Once the patches are deployed to the systems, in certain cases, some of the patches show anomalous behavior on the endpoints. In that case, stopping the patches and rolling back the patches is definitely a hassle for both the IT team as well as the end user. Now, in order to prevent that, the best practice is to test the patches on a pilot group of computers before deploying them to the production environment. Next is the prioritizing of the security and critical updates for all machines. So what happens is that in all of the Patch Tuesdays, we see a plethora of patches being released. Even this time, there were a total of 180 patches that were released. So now the question is how to prioritize which one is critical and which one should be deployed first. Now, basically, as a thumb rule, we would definitely patch the critical updates at first and then deploy the less severe updates, let's say feature packs or quality rollups. Next is the synchronizing your patching schedule with the monthly patch Tuesdays. So what happens once you synchronize the patching schedule with the monthly patch Tuesdays is that you get a heads up. So once the patches are released in the Patch Tuesdays, you can use the entire Patch Tuesday week for testing the patches, and then you can deploy them in the corresponding weeks once they have been tested. The next step is to choose a broad deployment window so that the end users never have any productivity drops or any lags in the systems due to patching. And you can also choose non-business hours to patch business critical machines such as servers. And lastly, it is very important and it is highly recommended that you must allow the users to postpone or skip the deployments and the reboots. I'll be demonstrating more in detail how you can allow the users to postpone the deployments and reboots once we go to the console. So I believe we are clear with the best practices now. On the right side of the screen, you can see the QR code to download the free ebook regarding the best practices for patch management. Kindly scan it to download the ebook. We will also be sharing the link to download the ebook in the chat. Also, to my IT admin friends out here, if you guys follow some different best practices for patching in your hybrid network, please feel free to share over chat so that we can share this with our community. All right, let's go to the Patch Manager Plus console. Due to time constraints, this will be a brief demonstration. To learn more about the Patch Manager Plus's capabilities, kindly drop your email addresses in chat so that we can do a full-fledged demonstration for you. The Patch Manager Plus dashboard delivers a holistic view of your patch management landscape, integrating essential insights such as network patch status, system health, and details on missing patches by severity and vulnerability. Additionally, it keeps you informed with the latest security headlines on the right side of the screen, ensuring you stay updated on significant cybersecurity news. I hope you all remember about the best practice. So the first task that I was talking about was to create a test and approve group. So how do we create one? For that, let's navigate to the deployment tab on the top menu. And on the left pane, you can select the test and approve option. The modify option here provides administrators with specific choices for managing patch approvals and testing statuses. Let's see what each of these options mean. So first up, we have approve patches, and under that we have automatically without testing. This option means patches will be approved for deployment immediately without undergoing any testing or validation. Whereas if I choose test and approve, it allows the patches to be tested before approval. This involves deploying patches to a test group to ensure they work correctly and do not cause issues before approving them for wider deployment. For the existing patches option, retain approval status maintains the current approval status of the existing patches. For example, if a patch is already approved, it remains approved after using this option. Whereas if I click on mark patches not approved, this will change the approval status of the existing patches to not approved. This might be useful if there is a need to reconsider the deployment of certain patches. So these are the test and approve groups that have already been created. Administrators select specific computers for testing patches. These can include servers, developer machines, or other business critical devices. Let's go ahead and create a new group. So dear participants, as you can see, we support patching for 3 different platforms: Windows, Mac, and Linux. We also support Microsoft updates, 850 plus third-party updates, and driver updates. So for demonstration, I'm choosing Windows. We can also select the other platforms, that is Mac and Linux. It is completely based on your requirement. So the next step is to select the target. So in case you have no custom groups created, no worries. Let's go ahead and create a new custom group. So once the console loads, you'll be able to see the list of custom groups that have already been created. So these custom groups may not be used only for the testing purposes. They can also be used for various other features. Let's say declining patches, creation of an automate patch deployment task, and a plethora of other features. Let's create a new custom group now. So the first task would be to name our group. I'm going to give a random name here. All right. So dear participants, kindly note that the next step is one of the important steps while creating a custom group. So while selecting the category for your custom group, do note that you should always go with static or static unique for test and approval process. These options provide better control over test groups compared to dynamic custom group. I'm going to go with static. The membership option allows administrators to manually select computers or configure AD settings for automatic inclusion. I'm going with assign manually option. Now with the computer selection, you can simply select the computers and drag and drop them to the right pane here. Let's finish creating our custom group. So now our custom group has been successfully created. Let's go back to creating our test and approve task. Let me choose my target here. Great. And moving on to the deployment option, you can select the Microsoft updates based on their severities. And then you can also choose to patch all applications or patch specific applications or choose to patch all applications except a few. You can mention the exemption applications here. I'm going to go with patch all applications. Similarly, for third-party updates, you can select the updates based on severities. You can even choose to patch specific applications or patch all applications except a few. And then if you want to deploy the driver updates, you can click on the checkbox. Moving on to deployment criteria, you can deploy patches after n number of days from the vendor release. Let's say 2 here. This means I choose to deploy patches after 2 days from the vendor release. Next up, you can associate a deployment policy with this task. You can either create a new deployment policy or modify an existing policy or simply choose any existing policies from this dropdown. Let's go ahead and create a new policy. So these are the deployment policies that have already been created. Let's create a new policy. Again, the first step would be to name our policy. I'm going to give it a random name. You can add a description if you want to. So dear participants, first up we have deployment schedule, and under deployment schedule we can see that we have 2 week split types. One is regular split and the other one is based on Patch Tuesday week split type. So what happens if I click on a regular split is that you can see the preferred weeks for deployment will be listed as first, second, fourth, and so on. And then the preferred days for deployment would be our regular days of the week. And then you can choose the deployment window. So folks, if you remember, one of the important best practice is to synchronize your patching policies with a monthly patch Tuesday. So I'm going to follow the best practice and then go ahead with the based on patch Tuesday week split type. So once I click on based on patch Tuesday week split type, you can see the preferred weeks for deployment are listed as patch Tuesday week, first week after patch Tuesday, and so on. You can refer to this help text for better understanding. So I'm going to leave the entire patch Tuesday week for testing the patches and then choose from the first week. All right, let me choose the preferred days. So dear folks, if you once again remember, the other important best practice is to choose a broader deployment window for seamless deployments. So I'm going to follow the best practice and give a broader deployment window. You can add as many schedules as you want as well. Next up, you can choose to download patches from the server to the agent, either only during the deployment window, that is during this deployment window specified here, or anytime the agent contacts the server. I'm going to go with the latter option. And then you can initiate the deployment either at system startup or at refresh cycle, that is during the 90-minute refresh cycle with a deployment window specified here, or either of these, whichever happens earlier. Let's click on Save and Continue. And moving on to the pre-deployment activities. So pre-deployment activity is a self-explanatory feature. These are the activities that will be performed in your endpoints right before the deployment is about to happen. So if you want to wake the computers on LAN, you can simply choose the Wake Online option. And then if you want your endpoints to get rebooted, you can choose the pre-deployment reboot option. So when I click on this, you can see that we have given exclude reboot for servers option. So this option is provided because servers might be running business critical tasks and rebooting them disrupt the workflow. So that is the reason why we have provided the exemption option. Next, if you want the users to get notified about the reboot, you can enable this checkbox. And with these custom messages, the users will get notified. So dear participants, the other special pre-deployment activity that we offer is the custom script option. So when do we use this option? Let's imagine a use case here. So there is an organization, and in that organization, there are a particular set of endpoints. And in those endpoints, there is this specific application running, and you want to close that application right before the deployment is about to happen. So what you can do is that you can simply create a custom script for that and then upload the script to the script repository. Then you can import the script right from here and then choose the necessary dependency files from here and specify the exit code here. All right, now moving on to the pre-deployment user notification. So if you want the users to get notified about the deployment, you can enable this checkbox. And with these custom messages, the users will get notified. So dear folks, if you remember the other important best practice, it is to allow the users to skip deployment. So I'm going to follow the best practice and so should you. All right, now you can also choose to force deploy patches after n number of days from the day the user had skipped the deployment. So let's say 3 here. This means I choose to force deploy the patches after 3 days from the day the user had skipped the deployment. And if you want to show the deployment progress on the client machines, you can simply enable this checkbox. All right, and lastly, we have post-deployment activities. So it is once again a self-explanatory feature. These are the activities that will be performed in your endpoints right after the deployment. So if you want the endpoints to get rebooted after the deployment, you can simply choose the post-deployment reboot or shutdown option. And we have a custom script option here. So with this option, what you can do is that you can restart those applications which were earlier closed using the custom script. Let's click on Save and Continue and finish creating our deployment policy. Just give me a moment. All right. So dear folks, as you can see, this is a summary of the deployment policy that we have just created. You can just go through the configurations that we have made and then click on Save and Continue. So as you can see, our deployment policy has been successfully created. Let us go back to Test and Approve tab. Let me choose the deployment policy that I've created. All right. Next up, we have notification settings, which is completely optional. So in case you want to get notified about the test and approval activity, you can simply enable this checkbox. And you can provide your email address here. I'm going to go ahead and give an example email ID. All right. So dear participants, if you have configured your Patch Manager plus mobile application, which is available on Google Play Store as well as on Apple Store for iOS, you can choose the technicians right from this drop down. So the respective technicians will get notified. Lastly, we have approval mode for tested patches. So in case you want your tested patches to be automatically approved after a certain number of days, you can enable this checkbox. Let's say 2 here. So this means I want my tested patches to get automatically approved after 2 days. Let's click on create and we have, just give me a moment guys. Alright. So dear participants, as you can see, our test and approve group has been successfully created. Now let us dive into automate patch deployment option. So what is automate patch deployment? So what this feature simply does is it automates your entire patching process without any manual intervention required. The creation of this automate patch deployment task is basically a two-step process. The first step would be to create a deployment policy, and the second step is to associate this deployment policy with an automate patch deployment task. Now that we have already created a policy, let us go ahead and associate that with the automate patch deployment task. For that, let's navigate to the deployment tab here, and under the left pane, you can see the automate patch deployment option. Let's create a new task. Again, the first step would be to name our task. You can add description if you want. Alright, so you can choose the Microsoft updates based on their severities here. And you can also choose the third-party updates similarly. And then if you want to deploy antivirus updates as well as a driver updates, you can simply enable these checkboxes. And lastly, you can deploy patches after n number of days from their vendor release or from their approval. Let's say 4 here. This means I choose to deploy patches 4 days after their approval. So now let's move on to the deployment settings. So under deployment options, there are two different options. One is deploy and the other one is publish to self-service portal. So let me just quickly look for the policy that I created. All right. So what happens is that the patches will automatically get deployed to the endpoints by following this deployment policy. That is, the patches will automatically get deployed to the endpoints with this specific deployment window as well. So then what is published to self-service portal option? Let us take an example of a medical institution. In a medical institution, with critical machines like CT and MRI scanners that are constantly in use, patching can be challenging, isn't it? A practical approach is to delegate patch management to the technicians operating these machines. By using the self-service portal, patches can be published directly to the technician's machine. Let's go back to deploy option. Okay, now the other special functionality that we offer is the patch outside deployment window. So with the patch outside deployment window functionality, you can seamlessly patch the endpoints that have missed the deployment schedule. That is, this deployment schedule. The deployment will be forced immediately on a successful agent server sync, irrespective of this deployment window. You can also define the number of missed deployment days, let's say 2 here. So the patches will be forced to deploy to the unpatched systems after 2 days. You can also force reboot within the deployment or reboot window, that is within this window or outside the same window. I'm going to go with within the deployment window. Let's click next. Up next, we should define our target. You can select the computers right from this drop down. I'm going to go with local office. If you see on the right side of the tab, you will find the filter option. This is basically to specify the second level targets. So I'm going to filter my computers, let's say based on custom groups, and I'm choosing a random custom group. And the exclude target here is basically to exclude certain computers from receiving patches by applying the same filtering criteria, ensuring that specific machines are not affected. I'm choosing operating systems and going with a couple of Microsoft systems. And lastly, we have configure notifications option. So in case you want to get notified about the download or deployment failure, you can enable this checkbox. And if you want to generate a detailed report on the failures, you can enable this checkbox. You can enable attach detailed report on failures checkbox. So as you can see, we support three different formats: PDF, CSV, and Excel SX. I'm going to go with PDF. Also, you can provide your email address here. Let me give a quick example email ID. All right. Dear participants, as I mentioned earlier, if you have configured your Patch Manager Plus mobile application, you can choose the technicians right from this dropdown. So the respective technicians will get notified. Let's click on Save and finish creating our Automate Patch deployment task. So as you can see, our Automate Patch deployment task has been successfully created. This demonstration was about how you can make the most of patch management best practice in your organization using ManageEngine's Patch Manager Plus. I'm pleased to announce that Patch Manager Plus offers integration with Tenable.io, Tenable.sc, and Rapid7. If you use any of these products, you can seamlessly integrate them with Patch Manager Plus. As a result, any vulnerability detail that have been scanned by Tenable and Rapid7 can be effortlessly imported into the Patch Manager Plus console, allowing you to efficiently deploy patches directly from the Patch Manager Plus intuitive console. If you're looking for more detailed guidance on a smooth integration process, you can find all the necessary information in the chat through the links that we have shared. Also, if you'd like to explore this further, feel free to ask for a demonstration by providing your email addresses in chat. Once the webinar wraps up, you'll find a form where you can request a demo session for the Tenable Rapid7 integration or any of the modules you might need assistance with. Just let us know what piques your interest. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be moving on to the question and answer session, wherein we'll be answering all your queries. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask via chat. Myself, as well as our expert panelists, would be very happy to answer all your queries. And meanwhile, I'll just give a walkthrough of our offerings. We have Endpoint Central, which is our unified endpoint management and security solution. We also have an MSP version of this. We have Patch Connect Plus, which is an add-on that seamlessly integrates with SCCM and Intune-based networks to offer patching for 600 plus third-party applications. Next up, we have Vulnerability Manager Plus, that is our in-house vulnerability scanning and mitigation solution that scans vulnerabilities and deploys patches right from a single console. And lastly, we have Patch Manager Plus, a flagship patch management solution. Dear folks, we'll be wrapping up the session in a few minutes, and once we close the session, you'll see a rating window pop up. Please feel free to rate the webinar on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. If you have any queries, please don't hesitate to post it on chat. Our expert panelists would be happy to help you with any of the queries. In case we have missed any of your questions, no worries, we will answer them via email.